Good morning, subscribers. Excuse me. You join me once again for the next in the series for Year 12 and Year 13, I guess, with regard to externalities. And in the previous couple of videos, we've looked at negative externalities, and today it is the turn of the positive externality. So a positive externality is, of course, where there is a positive external benefit to a third party. So if I choose to consume something, then that yields a positive benefit to an external third party who had no part in my decision whether or not to consume said good or service. Or positive production externality, again, where a firm produces something and as a consequence of the firm's actions, some other third party who had no say or no part in the decision-making production process, they then also benefit as a consequence. So today we're looking specifically at positive consumption externalities. So these are things particularly that the government would consider to be good for you. You all know, I'm sure, from your studies of the market economy that the government has a so-called paternal role. And so in the sort of way a cuddly father would put an arm around their son or daughter and encourage them to consume something, in the same way the government is supposed to do something similar, particularly with regard to goods which are good for us, which we of course refer to as merit goods. And I'm sure you've heard of this term, merit goods, as well. So I'm obviously in a merit good at the moment because I'm in a school. And a great example of a merit good is, of course, education. Because if you, the viewer, gain a tremendous education, then that is not only of private benefit to yourself, but there are wider ramifications of your education, for example, on the wider economy. Because if you are a highly educated individual, then your potential to get a job and contribute very effectively to the economy is so much greater. If you have a very good education, you will probably be a much more productive worker. And as a consequence, you'll be able to contribute, again, much more to the growth of the economy, be that here in the UK or elsewhere. But of course, who likes going to school, ladies and gentlemen? I do, but maybe you don't. And I guess, left to your own devices, as I've said here, you probably wouldn't necessarily choose to go to school if you didn't have to. And so, as a result of that, these things such as merit goods, if there was nobody putting the squeeze on you and saying you must go to school, then the likelihood of you getting out of bed and going to school for 8:30 or whatever time you start is pretty unlikely. And indeed, I've just been talking to some sixth formers, some of my year 13 who've just left and they're at university, and they were saying to me, oh, we find it so difficult now to get out of bed for sort of 9, 10 in the morning to go to lectures. And that's because they're not living at home any longer and they don't have that motherly, fatherly figure pushing them out the door. So that's one reason, of course, why you might underconsume these things. And the other reason why is, of course, you as a young person do not realise, possibly, you will because you're A-level economists, but other students won't realise that there are wider benefits to be had from your own individual education. And because of that, many people would choose to undervalue the benefits of education, and therefore they would choose to underconsume it. So the private benefit would be said to be less than the social benefit in that case. And then just one final thing before we get to the diagram, ladies and gentlemen. Remember our equations here. So on this occasion we're dealing with the marginal social benefit. And the marginal social benefit is made up of two things. Number one, marginal private benefit. Number two, marginal external benefit, the external benefit to society. And we'll see that on this diagram. Okay, so let's get to the diagram, ladies and gentlemen. I'll just double check that we're in focus here, yes. Now, you'll remember from my previous videos, when we are talking about consumption, that means that we are dealing with demand. And so on this occasion, and in this instance, we therefore know that we can just draw the one supply curve here, marginal social cost. It's called marginal cost in your textbook, but marginal social cost, MSC, is my preference here. Where we're assuming really MSC equals MPC actually in this instance. But because we're dealing with consumption, we should have therefore two demand curves. So all you've got to do is draw on two demand curves, which as you know are benefit curves anyway. So there's our two demand curves. And then we're thinking to ourselves, okay, so which is which? Which is the private benefit and which is the social benefit? That's the key question here. Now, we are dealing with a good which the private individual undervalues, and as a consequence of that, would underconsume. So consequently, this one, ladies and gentlemen, this demand curve here, which yields this level of output, Q1, at a price P1, this must be the private benefit curve, because that is the equilibrium point A here, which yields the lower level of output, or consumption of this particular good, education in this case. So we can label the rest up. So this one therefore is the marginal social benefit curve. This is equilibrium point B at an output of Q2 and a price of P2, or Q star, P star, whatever you want to call it. Okay, so that's that. So here we have clearly illustrated, this is the inefficient level of output here, or consumption in this case, and this is where ideally we would want to get to, because at this point the marginal social benefit is the same as the marginal social cost. Now I hear you saying to me, okay, Chico, so let's now please find the deadweight welfare loss, the DWL on this. And as I've said to you in the previous two videos, you always go to the inefficient resource allocation level of output, so that's Q1. And this time we simply take the dashed line, so it's up, 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 and then from here on up, we'll label this point C. And now we can see a triangle, ladies and gentlemen. Let's just shade this in here. And this is our deadweight welfare loss, as identified in the previous two videos also. So this, ladies and gentlemen, is your DWL, the deadweight welfare loss. Now this is the cost which is imposed upon society as a result of the restriction of output, or consumption in this case, below its most efficient level. If you restrict the consumption to Q1, then that's below its most efficient level. Now why is that a deadweight welfare loss? Well, ladies and gentlemen, same procedure as before. Compare A with C. C lies on the social benefit, A lies on the social cost. Benefits clearly massively greater than costs. If we were to move output along a little bit, Q3, take your point there, there's your cost, there's your benefit. Is it worth consuming more education? By James, by golly it is, because the benefit is greater than the cost. What about Q4? Is it worth consuming more education? By golly it is, ladies and gentlemen, because the benefit is greater than the cost. And indeed that continues to be the case right the way up to point B. And hence the reason why Q2 is the efficient allocation of resources and the socially optimum level of output. This is at point B. Because it's worth producing more and extracting all the possible benefit that you can. It's worth consuming more, should I say, not producing, and extracting all the benefit you can up to point B. And again, ladies and gentlemen, look at this. As my learned, esteemed student in my class, Daniel, said, this is almost, once again, it's like an arrow pointing at point B. It's indicating let's move from Q1 to Q2. Okay, so that's it, ladies and gentlemen, for this one. Now obviously the next part of the next in the series of these videos will be, well, okay, it's all very well saying Q1's inefficient, Q2 is what we want to get to, but how do we get there? What's the mechanics of that? And that, of course, will further develop this diagram, further complicate it also, but enable you obviously to really give externalities the full treatment should you get a question in the exam. Bye for now.